So tonight the topic is navigating crises and bridging cultural divides with citizen science. What is citizen science? What is the Zooniverse? Well, if you don't know, you've come to the right place. You are sure to listen and hear and understand a great deal more about these concepts as we go through the evening. But I have to say, navigating crises and bridging cultural divides, that sounds very timely to me. Our main presentation is going to be by Dr. Wolf Chase. Grace Wolf Chase is an astronomer and is going to be speaking to us from her experience in astronomy, but also her experience in reaching out and engaging the public, not just in understanding the findings of astronomy, but in understanding the work of astronomy. And she's going to be talking with us about that. Then we will have a comment and probably a few questions from our friend, Dr. Constance Burtka. Connie is well known to many people, particularly in the Washington, D.C. area. She is active, among other places, with the Smithsonian Museum, the Natural History Human Origins program, where she is involved directly as a co-chair in the broader Social Impacts Committee, a committee that attempts to reach out to the public and engage them around findings having to do with human origins. Sensitive work, as you can imagine. So the structure of tonight's program will be first a presentation from Dr. Wolf Chase. That will go for about 45 minutes or so. And then we'll go over to Dr. Burtka. Connie will speak for a few minutes. And then a little bit of exchange between the two speakers. But as quickly as we can, we hope we can open this up to questions from all of you. Now, questions from the wider audience are posed using the Q&A feature. So if you let your eye go to the very bottom of your screen, the bottom of the Zoom screen, you'll see an icon there that has Q&A next to it. Click on that, open that up, and you can type in your question. Now, when I type things, I try to be very short and succinct. And I assure you, when I moderate a meeting, I look for questions that are short and succinct and right to the point. So please make sure you're asking a question and that it advances our conversation. And very likely it will be added to the queue, and I will introduce it to the speakers, and then they will bat that around. So once again, our chief speaker tonight is Dr. Grace Wolf Chase. She holds a bachelor's degree in physics from Cornell, PhD in astronomy from the University of Arizona, and is currently the senior scientist and senior education and communications specialist at the Planetary Science Institute. The winner of numerous awards, a very distinguished career, and in particular, one that involves building bridges, not just with the wider community, but particularly with those of us who have religious interests. And as Maynard has already said, she is active in the programs there in Chicago, affiliate member of the Scien Center, and vice president of the Center for Advanced Studies in Religion and Science, otherwise known as CASIRAS. Grace, it's a wonderful honor to welcome you here tonight, and I'm just delighted and eagerly awaiting what you have to share with us. So please, go ahead.
Thank you so much, Ron, and Maynard and CJ and everyone at IRAS who took part in creating this wonderful webinar series, and for inviting me to be part of it. So in a few moments here, I'll be sharing my screen with you, but first I'd like to introduce what I'm going to be speaking about a little bit. As we all know, we're currently navigating many, many different crises, and these crises really mandate that we learn to work together across whatever divides we may have, whether they're religious or political or cultural in nature. And it's equally important to build climates where everyone can flourish, where diversity can flourish and everyone can reach their full potential. Throughout most of my scientific career, I've aimed at bringing the widest possible audiences into experiencing science and putting a human face on both science and the scientists who conduct research. Now, my talk tonight will be a little bit different from previous presentations in that this is not going to be a theoretical talk, but more about practice and community building. So without further ado, I'd like to share my screen and start my presentation. So during this time of isolation, it's particularly important to engage people in meaningful activities and interactions. One way to do this is through citizen science. Now, there are many wonderful platforms for citizen science that enable people from all walks of life around the world to become collaborators in research projects spanning diverse academic fields. Today, I'm going to focus on a specific online platform known as Zooniverse. In October 2019, Zooniverse won a prestigious Chicago Innovation Award. These are awards that celebrate the most innovative products and services in the Chicago region. Last year, 27 awards were presented across multiple categories out of more than 450 nominees. Before I get to that, however, I'd like to briefly share how I first became involved in science and religion dialogue. My interest was first sparked by my exposure to the Jesuit astronomers of the Vatican Observatory when I was in graduate school at the University of Arizona decades ago. And I'm not ashamed to admit that they've greatly influenced my own thinking over the years. After I moved to Chicagoland in 1998 and became more involved in science and religion discussions, I was struck by how many times I witnessed people talking at and often past each other, each convinced they were right, whether or not there was any true understanding or appreciation of the other's position or the life experiences that had shaped their different worldviews. Ironically, dialogue sometimes seemed to be characterized by a lack of actual communication. Now, this was all happening around the time that the multidisciplinary field of astrobiology was struggling to get physical and biological scientists speaking the same language. We actually needed a primer for that, not just to highlight important discoveries in the different fields, but to point out differences in word usage, jargon, techniques, and methodology employed across different disciplines. It was at that time that I began to visualize today's specialized society as something of a tree. Now, ideally, this would be a tree with a great many branches. However, I happen to like Joshua trees, and sadly, they are one of many species that are on their way to extinction. So we have a Joshua tree here. I actually wrote a couple of articles about 20 years ago for Meta-Nexus on this, observing that as we go up the branches of knowledge in our highly specialized society, often people who reach the pinnacle of their field, who have the greatest knowledge in one discipline, might not necessarily be able to communicate well with people on branches on the other side of the tree. Likewise, it becomes more and more difficult to communicate with people with a general knowledge, say people who are somewhere here along the trunk. What I'm basically saying is that in today's society, we often have to sacrifice breadth for depth or depth for breadth. The age of the Renaissance scholar or polymath is virtually gone. There's just too much knowledge across the disciplines for any one human being to hold it all and to be an expert in everything. So how do we bridge some of these communication gaps that arise? Well, physicist and pastor George Murphy first brought this Goethe quote to my attention. Wer den Dichter will verstehen, muss in Dichters Lande gehen. If your German is rusty, in English that means the one who wants to understand the poet must walk into the poet's land. And it expresses the idea that we learn about others by participating with them. A couple of summers ago, I took an online course in interfaith leadership through Dominican University. This course used materials developed by Ibu Patel, the founder of the Interfaith Youth Corps. While much of the course entailed reading articles by interfaith leaders and learning about research in pluralism and interfaith studies, the final project was participatory. Each student had to attend a service of a faith tradition, not their own, and document their experiences. This was arguably the most valuable part of the course because it was about interacting with actual people, namely people outside of our general sphere of the people that we interact with. So it's about interacting with actual people, not just ideas. In a similar fashion, citizen science invites everybody into the scientist's land by enabling people of all ages and from all walks of life to participate in science and interact with scientists. So now I'm going to share a brief video with you.
A brief introduction to the Zooniverse. The way we generate knowledge has changed a lot over the last century. Technological advances are creating huge amounts of data that can be hard for researchers to handle by themselves. The Zooniverse is an online platform that connects these struggling researchers with people all around the world who want to help. Together, these volunteers have contributed to many incredible discoveries and a huge amount of wonderful science, such as helping to sift through 1 million images of galaxies in the first project, Galaxy Zoo. Not only did this help to create the most comprehensive survey of galaxies, having so many eyes look at each single data point led to many unexpected discoveries, including a new class of galaxy that appeared as small green blobs, or as the volunteers called them, peas. The Zooniverse has since grown to include over 150 different research projects across all sorts of subject areas and scales, from the stellar to the subcellular and everything else in between. All of this is possible because of a community of nearly 2 million volunteers around the globe who together are changing the way that modern research is done. Why don't you explore the Zooniverse today?
So what citizen science is about is crowdsourcing the time and abilities of a distributed community of people by utilizing the very human ability for spotting patterns and making discoveries. Abilities that are shared by human beings, but not necessarily machines. Machines are not necessarily so good at doing this. Citizen scientists extend the reach of what professional scientists can accomplish. And in doing so, they learn about scientific process through participation and ownership. So citizen science is first and foremost about enabling large-scale research projects that require large numbers of human eyes or ears to actually make the project tractable. But it has this wonderful benefit of enabling people of all walks of life, all ages from all walks of life, to actually participate in science. So Zooniverse is the world's largest and most popular online platform for citizen science. It was launched about 11 years ago. The projects now span diverse fields in the science and humanities. With over 2 million participants and approximately 100 active research projects at any given time, and as you'll shortly see, it's resulted in hundreds of publications in top journals in the sciences and the humanities. So rather than talking about Zooniverse and telling you about it, I'm now going to take you to the actual website and give you a brief tutorial for about 20 minutes or so on how to navigate the website and show you some of the wonderful features, show you some of the wonderful things you can do with this platform. So right now, if you go to zooniverse.org, that you're looking at the main web page here. Normally, what you would do is register or sign in. You don't have to register to participate in Zooniverse projects. Registering is a good idea because you can get alerts to new projects as they spring up. And occasionally there are special short-term projects that entail Zooniverse partnering with the Planetary Response Network for disaster relief efforts. So it's a good thing to sign up to get these notices. And you can also track your participation in whatever projects you decide to participate in. Now, if you come up here to the main menu and click on About, you can learn all about why we do this, why citizen science is important, what citizen scientists contribute, and particularly about some of the interesting discoveries that people have made participating in Zooniverse projects. If you come up here to the menu and click on Projects, the first thing you'll notice are probably 4 projects that are highlighted. These are typically new projects every week. You can come down here and see a menu bar that gives you an idea of the breadth of the disciplines that are represented. So you can click on any one of these. There are projects in the arts, biology, climate, history, language, literature, medicine, nature, physics, social science, space. A lot of the projects are cross-referenced, so you'll find a number of projects under both climate and nature, or physics and space, or perhaps literature and language. Now, one of the things to check out are whether the projects are active or not. There are 3 categories of projects here. Active projects have data, so you can actually participate in the project. Projects that are paused or finished currently lack data for citizen scientists to look at, so it's a good idea to make sure you're on active projects. You can also come down here and sort projects by in various different ways. Most recently launched, those are the projects that have sprung up recently. Most help needed, most popular, et cetera, et cetera. If you know the name of a certain project you want to check out, for example, in a few minutes, we'll be checking out Galaxy Zoo, the first project to ever be launched on Zooniverse. You can type in the name of the project and go directly to it. If you mouse over these individual icons, you'll get a 1-sentence description of what the project is all about. You need to actually click on the icon to learn more about the project, to get the background for the project, what kind of help is needed. Now, the actual tasks that people will be doing when they participate in projects depends upon the project. A lot of the space projects are based on having people look at images and discern features that we're looking for in images, or perhaps graphs. The humanities projects are typically based on looking through digitized texts, often of handwritten records, where people need to pull out information of interest to the researchers from these handwritten digitized texts. Now, if you come up here to talk, this is really, really important. This is one of the best features, I think, of the Zooniverse platform. You click on Talk, you're taken to a general discussion board where you can interact with others, both participants in Zooniverse projects and members of the research teams that lead these projects. So this is the general talk facility. This is where to go for help sort of in general about the Zooniverse platform. Each project also has its own discussion board. In fact, that's mandated to be a Zooniverse project. Very, very useful because it's through that discussion board that participants can talk to each other and also ask questions of the research teams. Each research team has to provide at least one moderator that keeps up with the questions that people have about their project. Now, I'd like to also point out news. Okay, under news, you have a choice of daily Zooniverse or blog. This is where you go to keep up with what's happening throughout the Zooniverse. I've pre-selected a couple of items from the blog to showcase. For example, one of the blogs talks about fulfilling service hour requirements through Zooniverse and how a number of students and organizations are actually using participation in Zooniverse towards service hour requirements. Zooniverse has also recently partnered with NASA. This is a great partnership. NASA and other government agencies are becoming more and more involved in promoting citizen science as there are larger and larger collaborations that often require a lot of people beyond the scientific teams to help with a lot of these projects. Going down to the bottom of the screen here, if you click on publications, and I strongly, suggest you check out the publications, you can go through the hundreds of publications in top-notch journals in the humanities and the sciences that have been produced as a result of participation in Zooniverse projects. So I'm going to scroll down here to give you a sense of the diversity of projects and the papers it's produced. The most prolific project to date is Galaxy Zoo, and that's perhaps not surprising. That was the first project actually launched on the Zooniverse platform. Scrolling down a little further, I'm going to stop here at the Milky Way project. This is the project in which I've been most deeply involved. It's a project where people have been helping us learn how stars form by inspecting incredible, beautiful infrared images of our galaxy. My colleagues and I have recently submitted yet another paper in this series that's based on an actual discovery of a new class of objects that were discovered by participants in the Milky Way project. So we're very excited about that. Now, a lot of questions people have about citizen science is how reliable are citizen science classifications? How are these classifications actually being used? If you scroll down to the bottom of the publications here, you'll come upon meta-studies. Now, these meta-studies include a lot of studies into motivations of why people participate in citizen science, but also how reliable their classifications are, how citizen science classifications are being used to train machines to become better at spotting patterns. So in machine learning, algorithms that advance what machines are able to classify and do. And so this is a great place to check out some of these things. In all of these projects, I need to tell you that there aren't just one or two pairs of human eyes, but in Galaxy Zoo, for example, there are about 40 people that look at each image. So crowdsourcing is actually an incredibly powerful way of making these classifications and of assessing the reliability of these classifications. So now I'd like to go to a specific project and give you a little bit of a view of what you would be working on if you participated in this project. So I'm going to come over here. I'm an astronomer. I'm going to go to space, and I'm going to select a project that's relatively easy to explain in a short period of time. So we're going to click on Galaxy Zoo. And first of all, what is a galaxy? So our sun is one of roughly a few hundred billion stars in a large group of stars we call the Milky Way galaxy. In the observable part of the universe, there are roughly 100 billion galaxies. And if you tuned into Nancy Abrams' talk last month, you saw some spectacular visualizations and images of these galaxies. So here, the first thing you would want to do is come down here when you're on the project page and look at the statistics. Now, what these statistics show is how close to completion a project is. Why might you want to know that? Say you were using a Zooniverse project as a supplement to a class you were teaching, an astronomy class. You'd probably want to know that that project is going to be around for the duration of the few weeks or whatever time you needed for the students to fulfill their project for the class. The other thing to do is to click on Learn More. That will give you more information about the science behind the site. Now, in this case, Galaxy Zoo is about having people classify the shapes of galaxies. Well, why would we want to do that? We want to do that because it's amazing how the shape of a galaxy can tell us so much about its history and its interaction with its surroundings. And in doing that, Galaxy Zoo is trying to build a better understanding of what galaxies can actually teach us about the past, present, and the future of our universe. So once you've read about the science behind the project, you might also want to check out the team, who's actually the researchers that are actually involved in this project. And you want to get started, you would go to Classify. Now, when you hit Classify, if a tutorial doesn't come up immediately, it did in this case, I haven't signed in, it brought up the tutorial. That's the first thing you want to check out because that tutorial is very important. It will tell you exactly what you should be looking for here. And so I'm going to do this very quickly in the interest of time. So you go through all the steps, learning about how to answer the series of questions or what you'd be looking for in answering the series of questions. Now, a lot of people are worried that they can't do this very well. I assure you, people are very good at spotting patterns. And you've got a little field guide over here where you can have guidance on the sorts of features that you might be looking for. So real quickly here, I'm going to go through this. And so first of all, we're presented with a nice galaxy here that is showing some features or a disk. So we're going to click on features or a disk. And then we'll click on next. It's not edge on like this, but it's showing its face to us. So we'll click on next. Do we see evidence of a bar? I don't see evidence of a bar. So we'll go next. And so finally, you can click done. You can click back at any point if you think you made a mistake. And you can also click done and talk about a particular image. If you have questions or you want to know, say, what's that? You know, that's not the galaxy I was looking at here. So here we're done. Whoop, the internet connection seems to be a little bit slow. So let me go back and click on Get Involved and go to Education. This is a great resource for those of you who may be teaching classes or may be interested in using Zooniverse in a classroom or a group scenario or remotely in a classroom or a group scenario. There are discussion boards specifically for people who are interested in using Zooniverse in the classroom. There's also something of interest to you researchers out there, and that's this Build a Project. So about 5 years ago in 2015, the Zooniverse team launched a tool where you can actually create your own crowdsourced project. There's a how-to guide here to get you started on what is all required. Now, this project builder doesn't necessarily have to be used with a project in mind to be launched on the entire Zooniverse main website. If it is, it goes through a number of reviews by the Zooniverse teams. However, you might be interested in building your own smaller scale project. So you can go through this tutorial. It tells you all about what's expected, how to upload images, how to basically create your own discussion boards. Very, very, very useful feature. So what I want to do now is actually go back to my presentation. and talk a little bit about how useful Zooniverse has been during the pandemic. This is perhaps not terribly surprising, but Zooniverse participation has gone up since the start of the pandemic. It's fun and it enables everyone to become a participant, to make a meaningful contribution to expanding human knowledge during these times when many in-person community projects might be ill-advised. Many of the projects on the Zooniverse, especially the environmental and the medical ones, are geared toward improving conditions in developing countries and improving conditions among disenfranchised people. So you see here some of the comments resulting early on in the pandemic for people who participated in Zooniverse. During 1 week of participation, there were 25,000 new people that registered with Zooniverse and 216,000 participants who made 5.2 million classifications across about 100 active projects at the time. Participation amounted to 48 FTEs, full-time employees, working for a year, or one person working for 48 years. Imagine a lifetime career being accomplished in the space of 1 week. There were expression of gratitudes from people who were scientists on the research teams, like the Rainfall Rescue Project, who was amazed that they completed a whole decade worth of classifications in 1 day. And I particularly loved these 2 comments from a participant from Texas. Doing what y'all are doing gives us all a healthy sense, a healthy distraction from the rough situation we find ourselves in at the moment. God bless all of you, keep calm and keep on keeping on. Likewise, this is a great comment from a participant in Gravity Spy, which is a project about finding gravitational waves in data from the LIGO instrument. So this participant says, my thoughts and prayers will be with you and all the team and your families too, wishing you all good health and good progress with everything. And thank you all again on behalf of the whole community for keeping these marvelous science machines running and honing them to their quantum limits, and for the opportunity to contribute to this exciting effort. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about a project that I'm spearheading, a pilot project to proactively engage communities of faith and interfaith communities in citizen science through the Zooniverse platform. This initiative is funded by the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation's Public Understanding of Science, Technology, and Economics program, whose goal is to build bridges between the 2 cultures of science and the humanities, and to develop a common language so that they can better understand and speak to one another, and ultimately to grasp that they belong to a single common culture. Well, our goal meshes very nicely with this goal. Our primary goal of this project is to create enduring partnerships between academic researchers and faith communities to foster new collaborations and understanding between individuals from diverse cultures and backgrounds. So first and foremost, this project is about building new relationships. We accomplish that goal by working with diverse communities to identify existing Zooniverse projects to prototype for use in their programs. And what I mean by that is identifying diverse venues such as seminary classes, youth programs, adult education, to limit it only by your imagination, different venues where Zooniverse projects might add to the educational experience. We're also looking for people who would like to co-build new research projects with us using the Zooniverse Project Builder tool. So I greatly encourage you, not just in the discussion afterwards, but in going forward, by all means, email me if you think you might be interested in participating. So to give you a sense of the people who are providing guidance for this project and the activities in which we're currently engaged and the tangibles we hope to produce we plan to produce by next May, we have a diverse advisory board gender balanced, and it spans the Abrahamic traditions as well as beyond, both interfaith and no faith. We are, or I am primarily engaged in conversations with diverse communities to assess their needs and interests, to identify projects that are of greatest interest to these different communities, to talk about possibly building new projects, and to basically get the word out and reach new audiences. I'm available to conduct remote workshops and training sessions on using Zooniverse in various different venues. And by next May, we intend to not only bring in new audiences, but also produce a best practices guide for scientists on how to engage and retain different faith-based organizations, as well as templates for what works in different sorts of venues. DOSER is a great partner for this. I may have forgotten to mention that the IIAS Dialogue on Science, Ethics, and Religion is currently managing this project, and they have a number of their own resources for scientists on how to better interact with different communities of faith. We also have surveys that we ask people who participate to fill out. This is because our project has a very limited budget, and one of the things we need to do is assess what's sort of working, what isn't working, and how we can improve the Zooniverse platform going forward for different groups of people. So as far as getting the word out goes, we've been advertising this initiative through numerous electronic and paper newsletters of various organizations. You see just a few here. SciTech is the newsletter of the Presbyterian Association on Science, Technology, and the Christian Faith. Covalence is a publication of the Lutheran Alliance for Faith, Science, and Technology. We've also co-written a letter for the Council of Islamic Organizations of Greater Chicago newsletter. We've co-written that article with the Chicago Muslims Green Team. And I love this comment here by the team. There is an old Arabic saying, trust in God, then tie down your camel. So this is about engaging different communities in citizen science and showing the exciting possibilities. The other forum that we have advertised in is Michael Zimmerman's Clergy Letter Project. I think a number of you are familiar with this. This is an initiative to show widespread clergy support for good science. And I write monthly short columns for that newsletter. I will also, as I said earlier, conduct a workshop or a tutorial on request by anybody who's interested in exploring some of these possibilities further. And please, please, this is a small pilot project. We don't have money to advertise. So any suggestions that any of you might have for venues where we could further advertise and promote this project are very welcome. And they would help us a lot in securing future funding where we could perhaps build a larger project and address potential problems with the Zooniverse interface that might be inhibiting group participation currently, or might make it a little bit more clumsy for groups to work together on group projects. So I want to share one early success story. The IIAS, a DOSER Science for Seminaries program, has been funding seminaries that write successful proposals to integrate science into core seminary classes and campus events. And we were delighted that Professor Sharon Grant decided to use Zooniverse in her History of Christianity class at Hood Theological Seminary last semester. Hood Theological Seminary is a historically Black graduate and professional school in North Carolina, sponsored by the African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church. And last semester, Sharon had small groups of her students choose and participate in various different Zooniverse projects as part of the class and write reflections both on what they were learning in the science and at how that related theologically to some of the concepts in her class. So for example, in Parasite Safari, there are a lot of reflections on the church and ecological responsibility. Now, students initially were going to produce podcasts, and I'm sorry to say that because of the pandemic, unfortunately, they never materialized. However, they wrote some terrific papers. I was particularly struck by the group that was working on snapshot elephants for Africa. There were some particularly creative associations between the social behaviors of male elephants to hierarchies in the Black church community. Very, very creative. Now, since we're on the subject of seminaries right now, I'd be remiss if I didn't put in a plug for this book, Interactive World, Interactive God, edited by Carol and John Albright and Mladen Turk. Although this book was written with seminary students in mind, we think and we hope it has broader applicability to a wider audience. And the idea is that the concept of interaction is emerging as a basic principle across the sciences. And it stands in marked contrast to the old mechanistic view of a strict cause and effect kind of a universe. Now, this book contains essays by diverse authors across the sciences and humanities that explore the possible implications of thinking about the universe as a web of interactive relationships. So I encourage you to go check out that book. Again, Zooniverse can be used in group and classroom scenarios, and I can help you with that. If you want to use Zooniverse with a group or in the classroom, I would be happy to provide a remote introduction. You can also do that. I can give you further suggestions on how to use Zooniverse. And please, 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 if you do use this platform, let me know. This is extremely important. We want feedback as part of our project. And we do have evaluation surveys that we are asking people humbly to fill out. They're not very long. They take about 5 minutes, but they're very important to us and to helping us improve the Zooniverse experience for everyone in the future. Also, if you happen to have, go back one. If you happen to be sitting on a large data set and you're a researcher, you might have a project that would benefit from crowdsourcing. Many of the projects in the humanities and social sciences are based on transcribing certain information from large quantity of digitized records. Some of these projects involve very large collaborations. There's a project, Scribes of the Cairo Geniza, that is a very large collaboration between several universities and the Jewish Theological Seminary. But projects don't have to be that large, and they don't have to be launched on the main Zooniverse website. You might be a leader of a small individual church that has a lot of historic records that go back a long ways, that maybe you have completed digitizing these records, and you want your immediate congregation or some of the people in the local neighborhood to help you pull out information. That might be good for a crowdsourced project. We also have, as you saw, a broad array of research projects in the biological and physical sciences. Are any of you scientists sitting on large data sets that might benefit from having the equivalent of thousands of student eyes or ears assisting your data mining efforts? We want to hear from you. Although we're particularly interested in working with those who have ideas for projects that could be used in programs with faith or interfaith communities, for any kind of an audience, we can help you ascertain if the project you have in mind would work well on the Zooniverse platform. So please, by all means, email me if you have some thoughts on this or you think you have a project that might benefit. So what motivates people to actually participate? There have been a number of studies done on this. You can find those under the meta studies in the publication section of the Zooniverse website. But I thought I'd outline a few particular reasons why communities of faith are motivated to participate. And I think you'll see that they're very similar to what motivates all of us. So some motivations are just practical concerns, right? We understand that science is empowering and that enables us to improve conditions in our communities and across the world. Diverse religious communities share an interest in being responsible caretakers of the earth, good stewardship, social justice, and creation care. If you Google faith-based and interfaith organizations dedicated to the environment, I guarantee you hundreds of organizations across the US will pop up. There are many interfaith organizations and faith-based organizations that are interested in creation care. And Michael Zimmerman has a climate crisis letter that has been signed by nearly 1,000 religious leaders, I think, at this point in time, on the website of the Clergy Letter Project. And I encourage those of you who may be religious leaders to check that letter out and consider signing it if you haven't already. And finally, awe and wonder inspire us all. So these are values that lie both at the heart of scientific investigation and also at the heart of religious reflection. Now, I could easily supply you with hundreds of quotes from both scientists and religious thinkers that express similar reactions of awe, wonder, and amazement, similar to the 3 quotes I've highlighted up here. Amazement at both scientific discoveries and the religious or spiritual questions that science can be so good at raising. One thing these reactions tend to have in common is humility and an awareness of how much what we don't know exceeds what we do know. In fact, if I were to identify the 2 most important qualities in any kind of cross-cultural dialogue, they would be humility and active listening to your dialogue partner. Now, humility, I know, tends not to be a quality traditionally associated with the ivory tower. But there are signs that I would say, in the immortal words of Bob Dylan, the times they are a-changin'. There are many compelling reasons for scientists and religions and religious leaders to bring their combined talents to bear on crisis management and on increasing diversity in STEM or STEAM fields, where when I say STEAM, I'm adding an A to include the arts. Michael Zimmerman has written a number of recent articles on the responses of many religious communities to the pandemic and what response looks like when you actually put people before other concerns. Michael writes, "The reality is a greater percentage of our secular leaders, rather than our religious leaders, it seems, are willing to ignore science when the scientific advice leads to inconvenient conclusions. At the same time, there's a lot of current research in progress at places like Rice University's Religion and Public Life program, founded by Professor of Sociology Elaine Howard Eklund, that demonstrates the need for scientists to better understand the diversity of religious beliefs in order to address disparities and increase diversity in science. I wanted to put up this little post of an event, a webinar that's happening on October 5th in partnership with the AAAS DOSER program that talks about this very, very issue. Now, inclusion means creating climates where everyone can live up to their potential, regardless of gender, race, ethnicity, gender identity, religion, and so on and so forth. Exposure to different perspectives is not just good for science. It often gives us a deeper understanding of our own perceptions and biases. And success in any field often depends heavily on having mentors with whom we can identify, which brings me to the education of tomorrow's leaders. 95% of what most people learn about science comes from outside the classroom. Now that's important enough. I'm going to repeat that. 95% of what most people learn about science comes from outside the classroom. What this means is that informal education can powerfully shape people's perception of science and scientists for good or ill. So how do we give young people positive encounters with science? Well, one way is through church organized youth programs, and I've highlighted a couple here. So there were about 30,000 junior high and high school students at the 2018 Houston Youth Gathering of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, which featured a large exhibit area on engaging students in science and citizen science. Similarly, Sharon Grant, who I mentioned earlier, started an International Center of Faith, Science, and History at Hood Theological Seminary, which among other programs runs a summer science camp for youth. This summer's camp was virtual, and it included parents and scientists interacting with the kids virtually, remotely, speaking about their research. So finally, as a girl growing up in suburbia during the 1960s and 1970s, believe me, informal education had an enormous impact on my own love of science. It was far more important than my formal education. Throughout my career, my most memorable moments have included seeing the expressions on the faces of young people who are absolutely blown away by something they just learned about space. And I knew that those children would carry the emotional impact of those experiences throughout their lives, just as I have. Academic education focuses on shaping intellects, but the experience of wonder is primarily emotional, a gut reaction. It reaches across our divisions, and it speaks to our common humanity. Thank you. I'm going to turn this back to Ron now, and I look forward to having a broader discussion with all of you. I'm going to stop my screen sharing.
So thank you so much, Grace. That was absolutely terrific. We've been listening to Dr. Grace Wolfe Chase, an astronomer and the senior scientist and senior education and communication specialist at the Planetary Science Institute, talking with us about citizen participation in the process of discovery, to share the hard work, but the awe and the wonder that comes with it. In a moment, we're going to open the question and answer process for questions from the wider audience. To submit your question, go down to the bottom of your screen. Right at the bottom, you will see a link that has a Q&A next to it. Click on that. When the little box opens, type in your question. I will see your question, and we'll select those that seem to be most conducive to our moving this conversation forward over the next half hour or so. First, however, we're going to hear from Dr. Constance Burtka. Connie Burtka is well known in many circles for her own outreach to wider communities and interpretation of sensitive scientific discoveries to religious audiences in particular. She has a PhD in geology, a master's degree from Wesley Theological Seminary, and is currently involved as the co-chair of what is known as the Broader Social Impacts Committee that is part of the Human Origins Project at the National Museum, the Smithsonian Museum in Washington, D.C. So Connie, we're going to turn it over to you and simply share with us your reactions and some questions that you have for Grace. So go ahead, please.
Thanks. Grace, that was amazing. We could make this really easy and I could just say, yes, and we move on. But let me say, as I learned more about this work, I knew about citizen science. I wasn't that familiar in particular with Zooniverse. And especially knowing that you were trying to engage faith communities in this effort. My first response was really gut level. Of course, this is a great idea. Now, if I pause for a minute, I think about why that was my initial reaction and why I felt it so strongly. I think it has to do with my own past experiences as a research scientist, and I probably have experiences in common with other scientists. So that, you know, we know that the doing of science can be this very passionate, singularly focused and driven effort. And it has those incredible eureka moments, and it also has tedious data collection. But even those tedious parts are filled with this anticipation of what might be revealed. And here you've come up with something that provides an opportunity for anyone to sample those experiences. And they get to do it without committing to 4 to 6 years of graduate education, followed potentially by an equal number of years working as a postdoc, until maybe landing that elusive permanent position where there you get to worry for the rest of your life about where the next funding dollars are coming. Yet research scientists persevere, and they do so, I think, because both curiosity-driven research, the basic science, as well as applied science, research done to tackle specific challenges, are very motivating. So what scientists wouldn't like people to understand more about what motivates scientists? To understand more about the doing of science by experiencing that doing for themselves. And that understanding may be particularly important to scientists who feel they've been misunderstood, which has often been the case when it comes to relationships between the scientific community at large and at least some religious communities. But here's the catch: relationships are two-way streets, and we know that non-scientists want to be understood as well. And bringing both parties to the table, and in this case, I'm particularly assuming that one of those parties might be a faith community that has some skepticism about science. That's a real challenge. And I've had an opportunity to face that challenge myself. And I want to just mention a little bit about the Smithsonian's Human Origins program, because it's really the context for my question. So let me tell you about a specific project, just briefly. Over 3 years, I had an opportunity to travel with the Smithsonian team headed by Rick Potts, who's curator of the Human Origins exhibit, to 19 different public libraries around the country. And those libraries were each hosting for 1 month a traveling exhibit about human origins entitled Exploring Human Origins, What Does It Mean to Be Human? And my job on that team was to help support and facilitate events which invited conversation with community members. So we had the advantage of not only being able to introduce people to an exhibit that aims to illustrate how science has shed light on humanity's connectedness to the natural world, but also to have specific events that invited individuals and their communities to discuss how those scientific discoveries about human origins relate to their personal understanding of the world and their place in it. And when you described your recent workshop with interfaith leadership and the final assignment of attending communities that are different from your own, it really struck the nail on the head for me, because I always felt that one of the most meaningful experiences for participants in these programs during the traveling exhibit was that they had an opportunity to have conversations with scientists who were genuinely interested in their thoughts about human origins. Now that said, we had the best of intentions, but we still faced the same roadblock that many science engagement programs do. From the survey data our evaluation team collected, we learned that people, not surprisingly, self-selected when they visited the exhibit and attended our events. 81% of those who participated already accepted human evolution and were keen to learn more. That said, there was a very satisfying result for us. Namely, 19% of the folks who came were people who rejected evolution, but 73% of that group reported that they enjoyed the events and they were glad they had participated. And over half of them felt that the topic was presented in a way that was respectful of their beliefs. So I think we're able to create a space, to some extent at least, where people's concerns about the science could be expressed and discussed. And while they learned about the science, we learned about their religious perspectives. And that's the context of my question.
Very important.
And I realize this is a pilot project and you're just getting going. So maybe I'll offer this in the suggestion of something more to think about. So by proactively reaching out to engage faith communities in citizen science, and again, I'm going to assume that in some cases, you're specifically going to be trying to engage faith communities that might not self-select for this project. And that is a really important first step in building better understanding between faith communities and the scientific community. However, the dice are loaded in the sense that participation by the faith community members opens the door for their learning about the doing of science. But what can we say for the scientists? Is it fair to ask that this project also requires scientists to learn about the doings of the faith community, maybe even the doings of religion? And yes, the site has a talk and discussion board where participants can interact with scientists. But what I'd like to encourage you to think about, and it's not going to surprise me, you probably already have, do you have something specific in mind using that existing board? Or are you thinking about creating other venues that will encourage that the learning goes in both directions? That faith communities are learning something about science and scientists are learning about diverse faith communities.
So that's a great point, Connie. And I would say that one of the things that we hope, one of the results I think that we hope to see this project come to is starting to build those relationships where we can have scientists working together with leaders of these communities who have their community trust to figure out ways where we can make some of these experiences friendly to those individual communities and encourage discussions going forward. As you know, I've been involved in public outreach for decades now. And one of the most important lessons you learn is to know your audience, to know where people are coming from. And I know, for example, if I go to speak at a church that swings a little bit more conservative on some issues, I'm going to start out by having them get to know me, my background, how I came to my thinking about certain things. And I'm going to start with safe topics. By knowing your audience, you can sort of hand out the carrot, give them the carrot, get them to know you better, because trust is built over a period of time. It has to be earned. It's not automatic. And through building that trust, yes, I would hope that one of the end results of this project are providing some templates, as DOSER already does, for engaging how scientists can better be sensitive and can learn more about the communities and how important it is often to engage those communities. And this is an effort, I think, that requires a lot of the involvement of scientists that have a relationship with those communities already. So, for example, there are evangelical Christians in astronomy who are very good at speaking to some of the more conservative elements in their communities. There are African American scientists who are far more knowledgeable than their white male counterparts to speak to those individual communities. So this diversity requires partnerships and working with the people who can serve to bridge some of these conversations. So yes, right now we're establishing relationships through remote interactions. hopefully the pandemic isn't going to go on forever and we will be able to have more in-person events where we can do these things in a more personal kind of a way. You're also probably aware of the roundtable discussions that have been initiated. I am choking right now on the name of the person who spearheads this program, but what this is a Templeton-funded project to bring academics together with faith leaders in different communities around roundtables to have a lecture by a panel, have dinner together, and just talk about some of these issues in a very low stress environment that basically entails just getting to know each other a little bit better. The last roundtable discussion focused on humility and what humility can bring to the table. And that was my little reference as a 1960s person to Bob Dylan's The Times They Are Changing. I think that there are a lot of academic communities that are coming around to understanding that we just can't keep interacting with people like we traditionally have in the past. And I don't know if that fully answers your question or not, or if we want to open things up to a broader discussion now, or if you have some more reactions to that.
Well, those are all great, great ways to proceed. I'll say in general, I really, and I don't know the answer to it either. I don't know the answer. It certainly in communication, that yes, you want to identify individuals who the community trusts that you know, to engage with. But there's still this sense of it's about the science going to the religious community. So I think what I'm asking for is a little bit bolder, and maybe it's not even a fair thing to ask, especially for this project. But how do you get to the scientist who maybe doesn't belong to a religious community, isn't necessarily interested in engaging with them other than for their own benefit? How do you create a space, and can this project even do that actually gives those scientists a chance to have some of their stereotypes about religious communities broken down?
That is a great question. And DOSER has been involved in, I think this particular pilot project does not quite yet have such grandiose goals. Right now, we're working on, I can identify a lot of people who are good at speaking with religious communities, whether or not they are religious themselves. Some are, some aren't, but they have the sensitivity to understand that people are coming from different places and they're willing to listen. Not everybody is, and not everybody will be. As you also know, unfortunately, news media tend to be dominated by the loudest voices at opposite ends of a very diverse and not one-dimensional spectrum. And very often we get the impression that that this is how those dialogues proceed. And I think that the first step is just making it more well known that not all scientists want to attack people's religious beliefs, and that a great many of us are very happy to listen and to learn from other perspectives, and feel that diverse perspectives are good for science in the first place. And identifying members of different religious communities within the scientific community can be very helpful in establishing those bridges into some of those communities. And talking to your colleagues who perhaps don't know, some of which may be a little bit closed off to learning or to going there. I understand there's a lot of nervousness in the past. There are, you know, some scientists who just don't want to go there. We had a proposal rejected about 8 years ago to NSF's Informal Science Education Program, where didn't want to go to religious audiences, even though the project we actually proposed was about the science. It wasn't about science and religion dialogue per se. But I think a lot of those attitudes are shifting. And I think getting the news out in media, just having people raise awareness of the people who are willing to participate, that we will be able to build up a quorum such that some people are not going to join the conversation, right, Connie? There are some people in their highly specialized field, perhaps, that are focused on success in their careers, focused on getting out the papers, and not focused on the more broader conversation, but others who are. We don't need everybody to be, I guess is what I'm saying.
I agree with you, especially the last slide you showed. Times are a-changing, and it's very encouraging. And sometime offline, we can have a beer together and talk about rejected proposals from 10 or 15 years ago. You know what? Times are changing, and it's great. And it's projects like this that are really taking advantage of that. Thanks, Grace.
Thank you, Connie. I will be happy to take broader questions now from Ron. Bring them on.
Okay, well, thank you very much. A couple of times already, the dozer work has come up. You've referred to it several times, Grace, and
Yeah.
obviously Connie knows a great deal about it. The dozer project involves a number of, I should say dozer program.
Programs, yeah.
Which is called Engaging Scientists in the Science and Religion Dialogue. So it goes right to the heart of what Connie was pressing here. You can find out more about AAAS dozer. Very simple, AAAS. We'll just put AAAS and DOSER in a search box, and I'm sure that you will find it. But this is a question that comes in from Jennifer, and it really asks, I think, Grace, for you to clarify just a little bit when you're speaking of Zooniverse and you're speaking then for yourself. At one point you used the word we, and it wasn't quite clear. So Jennifer is asking, what is the relationship between Zooniverse in general and the we, when you said that we are particularly interested in projects that involve faith communities?
So I'm sorry, this isn't the royal we. My interest in starting in this entire project has been my interest in just interfacing with communities of faith over the past 20 or so years. This project started when Laura Truey, the vice president of citizen science at the Adler Planetarium and the co-PI of the entire Zooniverse program, came to me with the idea of writing a proposal that would specifically target faith and interfaith communities. So I am an astronomer. I do research in star formation. I do a lot of public outreach and engagement. I'm not formally a member of the Zooniverse team, but I work with the Zooniverse team. So when I say we, I mean myself and the Zooniverse team, and now, most recently, Katie Hinman at DOSER, who is involved in managing this project through DOSER. So that's what I mean. It's not like the royal we, it's a real we.
All right. Well, thank you. Two questions I'm going to link together, but let's start with this one from Christopher, who is a scientist in astronomy, by the way. Awe and wonder, both words in quotes, he puts them, awe and wonder, are they slightly different? If so, how can each be encouraged through religion or through science?
That's a great question. And yeah, my initial reaction when you read that question was, I think they are slightly different. Standing in awe, I think, is just being astonished by something. Whereas wonder, I think, draws you in a little bit more deeply, where you're astonished by something and then maybe it piques your curiosity and you start to wonder, how can I learn more about that? So I think that awe and wonder are very closely connected, but maybe they're slightly different. And I think that, well, so let me say this, my friend, Pastor Bruce Booher, who's also a graduate of MIT, has recently run through the Lutheran Alliance for Faith, Science, and Technology, a series of remote night sky observing programs that people can participate in. And he has a website, Mystery and Awe, I believe it's called, that probes some of these of understanding wonder sort of from the religious perspective and also where wonder comes up in science. And he encourages people to start wondering about some of these awesome things that we're learning in science and reflecting on them. And I think that that is really a natural coming together of something that's, you know, even beyond science and religion, that's just human, right? I mean, most people are curious about something. What I'm curious about might not be exactly the same thing that you're curious about, but we have that in common. It's part of being human.
Part of being human, I was thinking of that as you were talking. And back to Connie's program for a minute at the Smithsonian, the question, what does it mean to be human? And my guess is that a lot of people would respond, well, to have a sense of awe and wonder. But that really raises the question, well, when did that begin? How far back does that go? Did Neanderthals have awe and wonder? Did they raise these bigger questions? But let's zoom back here to the present and to us. And the second question, which you've already partly answered with Bruce Brewer's website. But this is from Benjamin. He writes, are there readings you would recommend that reflect on the spiritual significance of crowdsourced citizen science? I think it's very important how he's wording that. Not awe and wonder spiritually in science in general, but among people who've actually participated in crowdsourced citizen science. Has anybody kind of explored that? Thousands of diverse perspectives working together to generate new public knowledge.
So the closest resource that I might recommend, and I am really sorry to say I have not read his book yet. Chris Lintott, the co-PI of Zooniverse, has written a couple of books on the Zooniverse, and the most recent, I believe, is called The Crowd and the Cosmos, Adventures in the Zooniverse. And that book details some of the stories of astronomers and citizen science experience, and also probes in depth the discoveries that have been made, the significant discoveries made by people just from looking through images and being curious. There are participants in Zooniverse with no special science backgrounds that have actually won significant awards. The AAS, the American Astronomical Society, has a Chambliss Amateur Astronomer Award that has been in the past awarded to citizen scientists that have gone above and beyond in, say, participating in Planet Hunters, the search for planets around other stars, or projects like that. The Milky Way project that I've been involved in, as I mentioned earlier, citizen scientists discovered a new class of objects that we're finding are telling us some very interesting things about how stars form. So the Crowd and the Cosmos, Adventures in the Zooniverse, I think probably brings some of that to the fore. I don't know how much spirituality it contains, but I think that reading through those discoveries and their meaning for the people who participate and what it's like to be an astronomer, working in remote locations, praying for clear skies. So I think that that might be a good starting book. Again, I apologize. I have not had the time to read it myself yet, but Chris Lintott is a very good speaker, and I imagine from the reviews I've seen of the book that it's worth reading.
Okay. Well, this next question will take just a minute to set up. In your talk, Grace, you talked about what motivates people to do this. Sense of awe and wonder was one of them, but also commitment to social justice and ecological justice as being a motivating. Well, for many of us, both motivations are in play. And so I've got about 3 questions that try to intersect those 2 circles. All right, so I'm interested, Beth writes, in people who are using data collected by police departments to find ways of improving justice in policing. Or Stephen writes, what can we do in California, I assume with eyes on the ground everywhere, citizen scientists, what can we do in California with respect to learning about forest fires? So 2 very different challenges. Or let me add a third one to the mix. You know about the COVID so-called long haulers, people whose symptoms seem to linger and linger and linger. It would seem to me that their contributing their insight would have medical value. Is anybody harnessing citizen science in this way? So it isn't simply to look at data already collected, but to maybe generate new data sets that can only be produced by citizen observers.
Right. So my immediate reaction to that, I'm not exactly sure how to answer those questions, but NASA has had the Summer of Citizen Science where they've had a number of interesting speakers who have been in doing citizen science for a long time and have some interesting insights into what works, what doesn't, how to iterate on different projects, and have a lot of experience in those areas. So I might recommend, because this isn't really a few minute kind of an answer that I can give here, I might recommend a website. If you Google NASA's Summer of Citizen Science, there are some really interesting panel discussions that address some of the multitude of ways. Again, I'm a humble astronomer. I am not intimately involved in the building of all these projects. There are other people on the Zooniverse development teams who are. I think that is a very interesting question. And I think that there may be some people who are involved, but that might be a place to start, to listen to some of those panel discussions. And also with COVID-19, Ron, there have been a number of organizations jumping into providing aid where they can. I don't think that there is a medical project on COVID-19 up on the Zooniverse yet. The way this works are the researchers in those particular fields bring their ideas to the Zooniverse team, and then we have a discussion as to whether or not it's feasible to launch that kind of a project on this platform. Maybe that's not an entirely satisfactory answer to that, but I think that's the best I can come up with right now.
No, that's very, very helpful. Thank you, Grace. We have just a few minutes left. Well, a number of people are saying, great talk, Grace, and just congratulations, messages of that sort. Do you think that the Zooniverse project or other projects that you may have been involved with citizen science have been able to tease apart sort of the religious, temperamental, what's the right word here? The kind of the outlook of the citizen who who embraces this, as opposed to the outlook of a citizen who backs away. I mean, I'm reflecting on a question that comes in from Douglas, and he contrasts possibly two outlooks. Some of us are religious in the sense of, bring on the awe and wonder. I don't know very much. I'm open to learn. Others are religious in the sense of, well, I've got a book with all the answers, and I don't need so much to learn. Has Zooniverse discovered anything interesting about American demographic and cultural split?
There is demographic information available. It's mostly a gender and age based. The age curve is very flat, actually, across a broad range of ages. I probably didn't mention this, but really young kids are great, particularly at some of the nature projects. This really is a platform for all ages. You can use a computer, you can participate. You're an invalid, you can participate. There was one woman, an anecdote I heard of somebody who was participating while they were in labor in the hospital. They loved it so much. So one of the things that this pilot project is trying to get at with our evaluation surveys are people who are receptive to participating. If they are, why? If they aren't, why not? Some of those questions are being modified as we go along. Here's a good example. So I was at the Science for Seminaries retreat, the virtual retreat this summer, and we had participants go through this exercise. And one prominent African-American evolutionary biologist encountered one of our questions: do you trust that scientists work in the best interests of the public? And he just said, I have no idea how to answer that question. And retrospectively, I thought, well, of course. One, scientists don't hold any kind of moral high ground. There are scientists, obviously, who are interested in the betterment and the public good, and there are those who aren't, just like anybody else. And also, very often, we have distrust of power structures where the people in power don't remind us of ourselves. So there are a lot of reasons, for example, for African Americans to distrust scientists. So that's one of the pieces of information going forward. We need more data on those kind of questions.
Very helpful. Still a few more questions in the queue. We won't really have time to explore this, but Mukesh writes from Dhaka.
I'm sorry, I didn't.
Mukesh writes from Dhaka.
Okay.
Asking whether Zooniverse might be a platform on which he could organize, again, eyes on the ground, people to monitor various factors in a major metropolitan area. And I'm thinking this could be kind of like the way the National Weather Service has people reporting temperature readings and rainfall gauges and that kind of thing. But could, well, that seemed to me to be a very technical kind of question, but one worth noting because it gives you a sense, I think, Grace, of the breadth of what you're talking about here.
So there kinds of possibilities. There are different kinds of venues for citizen science. They're not all online. As you've mentioned, there are apps where people can go and collect data. There is also a program out of the Adler Planetarium's Far Horizons program where they've developed a bunch of these GoNet Arduino-based detectors that are detectors for monitoring light pollution. So the folks involved in this project are interested in collaborations across the world with people to use these detectors to monitor light pollution. So the sorts of things that this gentleman is asking about monitoring, yes, that's entirely possible.
Entirely possible, yeah.
Yeah.
Very,
and in effect, and again, I encourage people, you know, a lot of these questions don't have 1 or 2 sentence answers. So if people want to explore this further, I've put my email up several times. I can at least connect people with people who might be able to answer some of those questions in greater depth. And
Right. So, yes, let me encourage you, Mukesh, if you're still listening, to reach out to Grace and many, many other people as well. A question and then one final comment, but the question comes from Marjorie. You've already sort of answered this, but is there a recommended youngest age? Or maybe the question
Okay.
to ask first of all is there do you know who set the record for the youngest age?
Boy, I don't know that, but I've got to share a short anecdote now. So some of these nature projects are based on candid cameras that are set up in all sorts of settings, and people have to identify various animals. The younger kids especially love these. And I have a young grandniece, well, she's probably about 11 or so now, but one summer I showed her this, and I tell you, click, 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 she was going through these classifications almost quicker than I could see them, and she knew what she was doing. So young kids are very technically savvy. Often it's some of us older folk that are a little bit more tentative when we go through these things. So I would say also it depends on the person. If I would not encourage necessarily a 6-year-old to become involved in Gravity Spy, in looking for traces of gravitational waves in gravitational wave data, but definitely there are a lot of animal nature projects that a 6-year-old could absolutely do.
All right. Well, let's bring it to a close. I just want to share this one comment. I mean, Grace, you're aware that your first name is a venerable theological doctrine. You've hung around Lutherans enough to know about sola gratia, right? By grace alone. So this comes from our favorite Lutheran theologian on the call today. This is Ted Peters. I'll just read it, and this will be our way of signing off and handing it back to Maynard in just a second. But Ted writes, "Thank you, Grace, with gracing us with such a helpful presentation." So thank you from all of us. Thank you.
And let me return that and say thank you, Ted, for all the wonderful things you do and all the wonderful things you've written in your books.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Grace. And thank you, Connie, for just a fascinating conversation.